I am Zuri, 34 years old, and for the last 12 years my family has called me a dropout. They believe I am a low-level office clerk hiding in Virginia because I could not handle military life. Last night at a $4,000 dinner celebrating my brother becoming a Navy SEAL, his fiancée threw an $800 bill in my face and told me losers pay for themselves. I did not argue. I just handed the waiter my black titanium Centurion card and paid for the entire table. Before I tell you how I brought my family's empire crashing down, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to prove your worth to people who treated you like you were invisible. The clinking of crystal glasses and the heavy scent of seared Wagyu beef filled the private dining room of San Diego's most exclusive steakhouse. We were supposed to be celebrating. My younger brother Marcus had just finished his grueling basic underwater demolition training to become a Navy SEAL. He sat at the head of the heavy mahogany table, his chest puffed out under his crisp uniform, soaking up the adoration from our parents, Calvin and Denise. Next to him sat his fiancée, Chloe. She came from a long line of wealthy military officers and never missed an opportunity to remind us of her pedigree. I sat quietly at the far end of the table, sipping my water. To them, I was just Zuri, the ultimate family disappointment, who washed out of Navy boot camp 12 years ago. They had absolutely no idea that my brief stint in basic training ended only because I was quietly extracted by the Joint Special Operations Command. They definitely did not know I was now a colonel running covert cyber intelligence and overseeing the exact billion-dollar defense contracts my father was desperately trying to win. The dinner had been an exhausting display of pure arrogance. For over 2 hours, Marcus bragged loudly about how elite he was, how the military only accepted the absolute best, and how anyone who could not survive the training was a weak link that deserved to be left behind. Every time he used the word dropout, he shot a pointed, mocking look down the table at me. My parents just laughed and raised their glasses, completely validating his disrespect. Chloe chimed in continuously, talking about how her family of war heroes was so excited to welcome a real man into their ranks. I did not engage in their boasting. I did not try to defend my life or my career. I simply observed them, letting them wallow in their own superiority. Then came the moment that was carefully orchestrated to be my ultimate humiliation. The waiter approached our table carrying a sleek black leather folder containing the bill. Before he could set it down near my father, Chloe reached out and snatched it with her manicured hand. She opened the folder, her eyes scanning the itemized list of imported wine, premium steaks, and decadent desserts. A cruel, calculated smile spread across her face. She reached into her designer purse, pulled out a gold pen, and performed a quick calculation on a crisp white napkin. She ripped the napkin in half, placed it on top of a separate receipt, and slid it directly across the polished wood table. It stopped right in front of my plate. I looked down. Written on the napkin in bold red ink was the number $800. Chloe leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table. Her voice was loud enough for the neighboring tables to hear, dripping with that specific brand of condescending sweetness designed to completely embarrass. Marcus tells me you only work a lowly desk job in Virginia, Zuri. We are the future of the United States military tonight. My fiancé is going to be a hero protecting this country. You are just a dropout. In my family, we believe that failures should pay their own way. This family does not carry dead weight, so you can cover your own portion. We will take care of the rest. The silence at our table was deafening. I slowly looked up from the receipt and met my brother's eyes. Marcus was smirking, taking a slow sip of his beer, clearly enjoying the show his fiancé was putting on. I looked at my mother. She was busy adjusting her diamond necklace, intentionally looking away, completely unbothered by the fact that her future daughter-in-law was publicly degrading her own flesh and blood. My father actually nodded in agreement, crossing his arms over his chest, as if I were a rebellious teenager being taught a necessary lesson in financial responsibility. They expected me to react emotionally. They wanted me to flush with embarrassment, to stammer about not having the funds to pay an $800 bill, to beg my father to cover it, or to run out of the restaurant in tears, just like they claimed I ran away from boot camp all those years ago. They wanted to feed their own superiority complex by crushing my dignity in a room full of wealthy strangers. I did not raise my voice. I did not argue. I did not even break eye contact with Chloe. Instead, I calmly set my glass down. I reached into the inner pocket of my blazer and pulled out my wallet. I bypassed the standard bank cards and slid out a heavy matte black titanium card. It was an American Express Centurion card. A card available by invitation, only requiring a spending history and net worth that my parents could not achieve in a lifetime of running their logistics company. I held the heavy black card between my index and middle fingers and signaled the waiter who had been standing awkwardly a few feet away, witnessing the entire humiliating exchange. He stepped forward quickly, his eyes darting between Chloe and me. I handed him the solid titanium card. "Please run this for the entire table," I said, my voice completely smooth and projecting effortlessly over the ambient noise of the restaurant. "The total is roughly $4,000, and please add a 30% tip for your excellent service tonight. Do not split the check. I am covering everything." The waiter felt the weight of the metal card. His eyes widened slightly as he recognized exactly what it was, and his posture immediately shifted to one of profound respect. "Right away, madame," he said with a sharp nod, turning quickly on his heel to process the payment. I slowly turned my gaze back to Chloe. The smug, triumphant smile had completely vanished from her pale face. It was replaced by a look of utter confusion and profound shock. Her eyes darted from the empty space where the waiter had stood back to my face, trying to comprehend how a lowly data entry clerk could casually drop over $5,000 on a single dinner without breaking a single sweat. Marcus sat frozen, his glass hovering halfway to his mouth. My parents stared at me, their brows furrowed as their brains struggled to process the contradiction between the failure they believed I was and the undeniable display of immense wealth they had just witnessed. The illusion of their superiority had just been shattered by a single piece of black titanium. The silence in the private dining room stretched heavy and suffocating. The waiter had disappeared, taking my black card with him, leaving a vacuum of tension that sucked the air right out of the space. I watched my father. For a fleeting second, his brain tried to compute what he had just seen. The heavy matte titanium card. The casual authorization of a $4,000 tab without a second thought. But acceptance was not in Calvin Harrison's nature. His face transformed, the initial pale shock rapidly giving way to a deep, dangerous shade of purple. The veins in his thick neck stood out like cords. This was his classic tell. When faced with a reality he could not control or understand, he resorted to pure destructive rage. He leaned forward, his large hands gripping the edge of the mahogany table so tightly his knuckles turned white. Suddenly he lashed out. His heavy arms swung wide in a violent arc, striking his crystal water glass. It tipped over and shattered against a fine bone china plate with a sickening crash. Ice and water cascaded across the pristine white tablecloth, dripping steadily onto my mother's designer silk dress. Denise gasped, pulling her chair back abruptly, but nobody moved to clean up the mess. The mess was not the point. The intimidation was. "What kind of sick game are you playing, Zuri?" my father hissed. His voice trembled with a venomous fury that felt entirely disproportionate to someone simply paying for a dinner. He pointed a thick, shaking finger directly at my face. "Did you steal that card from some boss you are sleeping with? Or did you commit credit fraud just to sit here and pretend you are something you are not? You always have to do something desperate to cover up your own incompetence." I sat perfectly still, my hands resting lightly in my lap. I did not flinch when the glass shattered, and I did not blink at his horrible accusations. Any normal parent would be proud. Any normal father would be thrilled to discover his daughter was financially independent and successful. But not Calvin. In his rigid patriarchal mind, I was permanently cemented as the failure of the family. If I possessed something valuable, I must have stolen it. If I held power, I must have compromised my morals to obtain it. To admit that I had earned it would mean admitting he had been wrong about me for over a decade. I briefly shifted my gaze to Marcus. My brother, the supposed elite warrior, the man who was trained to handle high-pressure combat situations, was cowardly looking down at his lap. He was perfectly content to let our father tear me apart as long as the spotlight of family approval stayed firmly on his own supposed greatness. Chloe was leaning away from the table, whispering something to my mother, likely validating my father's insane accusations. Denise just dabbed at her wet dress with a napkin, her face a mask of irritation, annoyed that my mere presence had disrupted their perfect evening. My father stood up, his heavy chair scraping violently against the hardwood floor. His large frame towered over the table. "You listen to me, and you listen to me carefully," he roared. His voice echoed off the wood-paneled walls, loud enough to turn heads in the main dining area outside our private room. "Tomorrow is your brother's big day. He is a real Navy SEAL. He earned his trident. He survived the hardest military training on the planet. He achieved something you never had the guts to do." The words were calculated. They were aimed precisely at an old, deep wound that he thought still bled. "If you do anything to ruin his ceremony tomorrow," Calvin continued, leaning over the table so his face was inches from mine, his breath smelling of expensive red wine and bitter resentment. "If you pull a stunt to steal his spotlight or embarrass us like you did when you cried and quit boot camp 12 years ago, I swear to God I am done with you. I will write you out of this family for good. You will be entirely dead to me." 12 years. For 12 long years they had clung to that narrative like a safety blanket. They loved the story of Zuri the weakling, Zuri the fragile girl who could not handle the physical and mental toll of basic training. They loved it because it made Marcus look like a god by comparison. Every Thanksgiving, every Christmas, every family gathering was punctuated by snide remarks about my lack of discipline. I could have told them the truth right then. I could have shouted that military intelligence had pulled me from basic training in the dead of night because my cryptographic aptitude scores were the highest they had seen in a generation. I could have told them that I did not drop out, but was quietly recruited into a highly classified cyber warfare division of the Pentagon. I could have mentioned that the lucrative logistics contracts my father's struggling transport company was desperately begging the government for actually crossed my desk for final approval. But I did not say a single word. Letting them wallow in their comfortable delusions for one more night was part of the process. I simply stared at my father's red, angry face, feeling absolutely nothing but a cold, clinical detachment. Right on cue, a sharp, double vibration buzzed against my ribcage. I reached into my blazer pocket and pulled out my heavily encrypted secure device. The screen illuminated, casting a faint blue glow over my face. I bypassed the complex biometric locks and opened the secure messaging channel. It was a direct line to my lead intelligence officer at Cyber Command. The text glowed stark white against the black background. "Colonel, the classified files regarding Calvin Harrison's fraudulent Department of Defense logistics bids are fully compiled. We have traced the shell companies and the offshore accounts. Additionally, the digital evidence of Marcus Harrison's physical test violations and forged tactical credentials at Basic Underwater Demolition School has been secured. They are entirely compromised. Awaiting your final orders." I locked the screen and slid the phone back into my pocket. My family was still staring at me, waiting for me to break. They expected tears. They expected a desperate, stammering apology. Instead, I looked directly into my father's furious eyes, picked up my glass of water, and offered a calm, chilling smile. I placed my water glass back on the mahogany table with a soft, definitive clink. Without a single word of defense, without a single apology to soothe his fragile ego, I turned my back on Calvin Harrison's purple, rage-filled face. The heavy oak door of the private dining room clicked shut behind me, instantly muting my father's continued sputtering and my mother's dramatic sighs. I walked through the main dining room with calm, measured steps, feeling the sudden sharp contrast between their desperate, loud arrogance and my absolute silence. The waitstaff parted respectfully as I moved toward the exit, their eyes wide, having clearly caught wind of the data entry clerk who had just casually dropped a black titanium American Express card to clear a $4,000 bill. Stepping out into the crisp, cool San Diego night air, I approached the valet stand and handed over my ticket. I enjoyed the brief moment of solitude, the quiet hum of the city traffic providing a welcome relief from the suffocating toxicity of my family. But the peace was incredibly short-lived. The heavy brass doors of the steakhouse swung open violently behind me. The unmistakable sound of my mother's sharp, complaining voice and my father's heavy, aggressive footsteps signaled that the entire family had followed me out. Marcus and Chloe were right beside them. I glanced over my shoulder. Chloe was gripping a half-full crystal glass of Cabernet Sauvignon that she had brazenly carried out of the restaurant, a perfect display of her entitled belief that standard rules simply did not apply to her or her future husband. They stood a few feet away on the concrete curb, shooting absolute daggers at me. My mother was loudly lamenting to my father about my blatant disrespect, purposely raising her voice so the valet attendants and other waiting patrons could hear every word. She spun a quick rehearsed narrative about how ungrateful I was, how I always ruined their special occasions with my terrible attitude, completely ignoring the fact that I had just paid for the very occasion she was crying about. Marcus stood tall, puffing his chest out and adjusting his crisp white uniform collar, desperately trying to reclaim the alpha status he felt he had lost when his dropout sister bailed him out financially. My sleek dark sedan was pulled around by the valet, the headlights cutting through the dim parking lot. As I stepped forward to take my keys and tip the driver, Chloe suddenly rushed past my parents. She moved with a strange, frantic energy, her designer heels clicking sharply against the pavement. Her mind was clearly racing. She was not going to let me leave on my own terms. She needed the absolute last word. She needed to physically reassert her dominance over the family failure to prove that her pedigree made her untouchable. As I reached for the door handle, Chloe lunged forward. She forced her ankle to roll in an exaggerated, highly theatrical stumble. She threw her arms out wildly, and the dark contents of her crystal glass flew straight forward. A heavy dark splash of vintage red wine hit the bodice of my dress. It was not just any dress. It was an exclusive custom-tailored piece from a private designer in Milan, understated in its elegance, but worth significantly more than the flashy engagement ring Marcus had bought her. The deep crimson liquid rapidly spread across the pale silk fabric, a glaring, sticky mess that immediately soaked through to my skin, sending a cold shiver down my chest. Before I could even take a step back, Chloe crashed into me, her hands gripping my shoulders tightly as if to steady herself. Her face pressed uncomfortably close to mine. The heavy, sweet scent of alcohol mixed with her expensive floral perfume filled my senses. Her previous look of clumsy panic vanished instantly, replaced by a cold, deeply malicious sneer. She leaned her mouth right next to my ear, ensuring no one else could catch a single syllable of her true intentions. "I am just making sure the ugly dropout duckling does not try to outshine my prestigious lineage of elite white military wives tomorrow," she whispered. Her voice dropped into a raspy, venomous hiss. "You might have found some pathetic sugar daddy to pay for your dinner tonight, Zuri, but you are still a complete loser. Know your place. You are a dirty stain on this family, just like that dress." She pulled back quickly, her hands flying to her mouth in a flawless picture of mock horror. "Oh my gosh, Zuri, I am so incredibly sorry," she gasped loudly, projecting her voice to ensure my parents and the valet attendants caught her brilliant performance. "I just lost my footing in these new heels. It was a total accident." My mother let out a sharp sigh of profound annoyance, marching over to us. "Honestly, Zuri, if you had not been rushing off in such a dramatic huff, Chloe would not have tripped trying to politely say goodbye to you. Look at the absolute mess you caused. You are always so careless." My father snorted in agreement, crossing his arms and shaking his head at my apparent clumsiness. Even now, with my dress ruined by her deliberate action, they twisted the reality to make me the villain, and Chloe the poor innocent victim. Marcus actually stepped forward and put a protective arm around Chloe's waist, glaring at me as if I had assaulted his fiancée. I looked down at the ruined silk. The wine was cold and uncomfortable, but the fury in my chest burned incredibly hot and purely focused. I did not raise a hand to wipe the liquid away. I did not scream at Chloe for her blatant assault. I did not waste my breath defending myself against my mother's completely twisted logic. My tactical training kicked in, overriding any impulsive emotional reaction. They wanted a screaming match in a parking lot. They wanted me to look crazy. I was going to give them nothing. Instead, I slowly reached back into the inner pocket of my blazer. I pulled out my secure communication device. The heavily encrypted screen lit up, casting a pale blue glow over my face in the shadows of the valet stand. I bypassed the security protocols and opened the direct command channel to my lead intelligence officer at Cyber Command. I stared at the blinking cursor for a fraction of a second. For years, I had held off. I had watched my father secure government transport contracts using inflated numbers and falsified safety records. I had watched Marcus cut corners, cheat on his physical evaluations, and bribe his way through the ranks to secure his precious Navy SEAL trident. I had possessed the power to expose them all, but I had shown mercy for the sake of family peace. That mercy evaporated the moment that red wine hit my chest. I typed a single decisive command: revoke all immunities, execute the operation tomorrow. I watched the message encrypt and send, confirming that the protective veil I had secretly kept over my family's fraudulent lives was now officially lifted. The digital trap was armed and ready to spring. I secured the phone, the screen going black, and slid it smoothly back into my pocket. I looked up and met Chloe's smug, triumphant eyes. She was waiting for me to cry over the ruined designer fabric. A slow, genuine smile spread across my face, cold and utterly terrifying in its calm. "Do not worry about the dress, Chloe," I said. My voice was incredibly smooth, perfectly steady, and sliced right through the crisp San Diego night air. "Tomorrow, Marcus is going to have a ceremony he will never ever forget." The crisp, salty breeze blowing off the Pacific Ocean did little to cool the heavy anticipation settling over Naval Base Coronado. The morning sun reflected brilliantly off the pristine white uniforms of the graduating class, standing in perfect formation on the sprawling grinder. This was the holy ground of the United States Navy SEALs, a place where weakness was systematically eradicated, and only the absolute elite earned the right to wear the coveted trident. For my family, today was supposed to be the ultimate coronation. It was the day Marcus officially transcended from the golden boy of a wealthy logistics contractor to a certified military hero. I arrived precisely 45 minutes before the ceremony was scheduled to begin. I wore a sharp, tailored charcoal suit, my hair pulled back into a severe, flawless bun. The ruined silk dress from the night before was already in the trash, completely forgotten. My mind was entirely focused on the tactical execution of the morning. Walking through the security checkpoints, I barely registered the rigorous checks. My credentials, hidden deep within the Pentagon's highly classified database, meant the base security systems automatically flagged me as a VIP with clearance levels higher than the base commander himself, though the young guards simply scanning my generic guest pass had no idea. As I approached the main seating area facing the grand stage, the social hierarchy of the event was immediately obvious. The front rows were sectioned off with thick velvet ropes reserved exclusively for high-ranking officers, distinguished guests, and the immediate families of the graduates. I spotted them instantly. My father, Calvin, was holding court in the dead center of the front row. He was practically vibrating with self-importance, his chest puffed out in a tailored navy blazer, laughing far too loudly at something a man covered in military ribbons was saying. That man was Chloe's father, a highly decorated vice admiral. Chloe stood beside him, playing the role of the perfect, demure military fiancée, a stark contrast to the vicious woman who had deliberately assaulted me in a parking lot just 12 hours prior. My mother, Denise, was hovering right next to them, wearing a wide, painfully artificial smile as she desperately tried to mirror the old-money elegance of Chloe's mother. They looked like a picture-perfect advertisement for American success. They were completely oblivious to the massive digital guillotine hanging directly over their necks. I adjusted the strap of my leather shoulder bag and began walking down the central aisle toward the VIP section. I had barely taken 10 steps when my mother's eyes darted away from the Admiral's wife and locked onto me. The artificial warmth on her face vanished in a fraction of a second, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated panic. She whispered something quickly to my father, then broke away from the group marching swiftly up the aisle to intercept me before I could get anywhere near her new prestigious social circle. She grabbed me by the forearm the moment I was out of earshot of the front row. Her manicured nails dug sharply through the wool fabric of my suit jacket. She forcefully pulled me behind a large cluster of decorative flags, standing near the middle aisle, completely shielding me from the view of Chloe's family. "What are you doing walking down here?" Denise hissed, her voice a harsh, frantic whisper. Her eyes darted wildly around, making sure none of the other guests were paying attention to us. "I am looking for my seat, Mother," I replied, my voice perfectly level, my heart rate resting at a cool, steady pace. I assumed the family of the graduate would be seated together. Denise let out a sharp, derisive scoff, her grip tightening on my arm. She reached into her designer clutch with her free hand and aggressively shoved a crumpled piece of thick paper directly against my chest. I took it, glancing down. It was a standard admission ticket. The section printed on it was Row Z. It was the absolute last row of the entire outdoor amphitheater, a section typically reserved for overflow crowds, distant acquaintances, and base staff. "You are not sitting in the same row as Marcus's in-laws," Denise snarled, her face leaning in close so I could smell the strong peppermint breath mint she was chewing. "They are a prestigious military family, Zuri. Chloe's father is a vice admiral. Her grandfather was a war hero. They represent everything elite and honorable about the armed forces. The presence of a Navy runaway like you will completely stain his perfect image today." I looked at the cheap, crinkled ticket in my hand, then back up at the woman who had birthed me. Her eyes held nothing but contempt and a desperate clawing need to protect her own social standing. She was terrified. She was genuinely terrified that my mere existence, my history of supposedly washing out of basic training 12 years ago, would somehow contaminate the glorious fiction she had built around Marcus. "You think you can just buy our forgiveness by paying for one fancy dinner with money you probably scammed off someone." Denise continued, her words dripping with absolute disgust. "You are a failure, Zuri. You always have been. We are not letting you ruin this day by sitting up there and inviting questions from the Admiral about your pathetic lack of a career. You will sit in the back, you will keep your mouth shut, and you will not approach Chloe's family under any circumstances. Do you understand me?" A normal daughter would have broken down. A normal daughter would have cried, thrown the ticket in her mother's face, and stormed out of the naval base exactly as Denise wanted. She wanted me gone, but settling for hiding me in the shadows was her backup plan. I did not feel an ounce of sorrow. I did not feel the familiar childhood sting of rejection. I just felt a profound, overwhelming sense of pity for the fragile, pathetic house of cards she was fighting so hard to protect. I looked directly into my mother's harsh, judgmental eyes. I did not raise my voice. I did not argue. I simply offered her a polite, entirely hollow nod. "Rosie is perfectly fine, Mother," I said smoothly, stepping back so her hand fell away from my arm. "In fact, it provides an excellent view of the entire stage. I would not want to miss a single second of what happens to Marcus today." Denise narrowed her eyes, searching my face for a trace of sarcasm or rebellion. Finding only absolute calm, she huffed, smoothing down the front of her expensive dress. "Just stay out of sight," she muttered, turning on her heel and marching quickly back down the aisle to reclaim her spot next to the Vice Admiral, pasting that fake bright smile back onto her face the moment she stepped past the velvet ropes. I turned and walked in the opposite direction, ascending the bleachers step by step. The higher I went, the further away I got from the glittering brass and the wealthy elite, but the wider my field of vision became. When I finally reached Row Z, I took my seat at the very edge of the aisle. The metal bench was cold, but the vantage point was exactly as I had described to my mother, flawless. From up here, I could see the entire layout of the ceremony. I could see the massive American flag draped behind the podium. I could see the graduates standing at attention in the staging area to the left. I could see my father laughing and clapping Chloe's father on the shoulder, entirely convinced he had finally secured his place among the untouchable American elite. More importantly, from Roside, I could see the subtle, invisible movements of the people who actually controlled this base. I crossed my legs and casually rested my hands on my lap. To my left, standing near one of the main exit arches, a man in a sharp civilian suit caught my eye. He reached up, seemingly adjusting his sunglasses, and gave me a barely perceptible nod. To the right of the main stage, a woman in a standard Navy dress uniform briefly turned her head toward the back row and mirrored the exact same gesture. They were Joint Special Operations Command operatives. My operatives. They were perfectly positioned, entirely blended into the background and waiting for my signal. I reached into my bag and pulled out my encrypted device. The screen was already glowing with a secure message from my cyber warfare division back in Virginia. The data packet containing Calvin Harrison's fraudulent defense contracts and Marcus Harrison's forged tactical credentials had been successfully transmitted to the base commander's secure terminal exactly 5 minutes ago. The digital locks were blown. The truth was now sitting directly on the desk of the man preparing to hand Marcus his trident. I locked the phone and slid it away. A heavy booming voice echoed over the massive public address system, requesting that all guests take their seats as the presentation of the graduating class was about to begin. The crowd quieted instantly, a wave of respectful silence washing over the amphitheater. The military band struck up a sharp, rhythmic march. Down in the front row, I watched my mother excitedly grab my father's arm. Chloe leaned forward, her phone already raised to record the moment her fiancé became a hero. They were practically glowing with unwarranted pride. I leaned back against the cool metal railing of row Z, my eyes fixed sharply on the center of the stage. Denise was right about one thing. Sitting in the back row was the perfect place for me today. It was the only place where I could comfortably watch the entire Harrison family empire burn to the ground. The military band finished their sharp rhythmic march, the final brass notes ringing out clearly across the sprawling black asphalt of the grinder. A crisp ocean breeze swept over the Coronado base, snapping the halyards against the flagpoles. The crowd settled into a respectful, expectant silence as the base commander, Captain Elias Vance, approached the heavy wooden podium. He was a man carved from granite, his chest heavy with commendations earned through decades of actual, genuine sacrifice. He spoke with a gravelly authority about the grueling, unforgiving crucible of basic underwater demolition/SEAL training. He spoke of the brutal physical toll, the psychological warfare, and the unbreakable brotherhood forged in the freezing Pacific waters during Hell Week. From my vantage point in row Z, I watched my father nod solemnly in the front row, his chest puffed out so far the buttons on his tailored navy blazer looked ready to snap. He was absorbing the commander's words as if they were his own personal achievements. Beside him, Chloe's father, the vice admiral, offered a stoic, approving murmur. Then the moment they had all been waiting for arrived. The names of the graduating class were called one by one. When Marcus Harrison was announced over the booming public address system, the section of the VIP seating containing my family erupted. My mother actually let out a high-pitched shriek of joy, her hands clapping frantically. Chloe bounced on her toes, cheering loudly. Marcus stepped forward from the staging area. He marched across the stage with a rigid, highly exaggerated swagger. His pristine white dress uniform was immaculate, the creases pressed to a razor-sharp edge. He looked exactly like the hero they all desperately wanted him to be. He stopped in front of Captain Vance, saluted sharply, and stood completely rigid as the heavy gold trident was pinned to his chest. For a normal graduate, that would be the end of it. A salute, a handshake, and a step back into the ranks. But my father had pulled strings. He had heavily lobbied the base command, likely leveraging his fraudulent Department of Defense logistics contracts and his impending marriage into a vice admiral's family to secure Marcus the privilege of being the class speaker. Marcus stepped up to the podium. He gripped the edges of the wood, leaning forward with a deeply practiced look of solemn humility that quickly gave way to pure, unadulterated narcissism. "Thank you, Captain Vance." Marcus began, his voice amplified across the entire amphitheater. He paused, letting the silence stretch out, basking in the glow of hundreds of eyes fixed solely on him. "They tell you that Bud/S will break you. They tell you that the cold will fracture your mind, and the sand will grind down your spirit. And they are right. It is a crucible designed to strip away the weak. But as I stood there in the freezing surf, fighting through the absolute limits of human endurance, I knew I could not fail. I knew I had a legacy to uphold. I sat perfectly still on my cold metal bench. I watched him bloviate, spinning a masterful web of lies. I knew the exact cost of that legacy. I knew about the forged stamina reports. I knew about the heavily bribed medical officers who conveniently looked the other way when Marcus failed his underwater breath-holding requirements. I knew about the highly classified tactical evaluation scores that had been artificially inflated by a compromised instructor. He had not survived the crucible. He had bought his way around it. Marcus looked directly down into the front row, locking eyes with our father. I drew my strength from the man sitting right here. Calvin Harrison, a man of absolute integrity, a man who built an empire from the ground up on the principles of honest, unyielding hard work. He taught me that a Harrison never backs down from a fight. The sheer audacity of the lie was almost impressive. Calvin Harrison's empire was currently bleeding the federal government dry through offshore shell companies and phantom logistics fleets, all of which were currently being meticulously unraveled by my cyber command team back in Virginia. But Marcus was not finished. His ego required more than just self-praise. It required a victim to elevate his own supposed greatness. He shifted his gaze, sweeping over the crowd, his voice dropping into a tone of mock sorrow mixed with biting arrogance. "This trident is a symbol of unyielding perseverance," Marcus declared, his voice echoing off the surrounding concrete buildings. "It separates the elite from the ordinary. This level of excellence, this absolute peak of human performance, is not meant for everyone." He paused, letting the weight of his impending insult hang in the air. "It certainly is not for weak quitters who abandon their posts when things get difficult. It is not for those who lack the fortitude to finish what they start, those who would rather run away in the dead of night and stain a proud family tradition of strength. We are the elite because we stay when others break." The words were a direct, undeniable missile aimed straight at the back of the amphitheater. The crowd applauded politely, unaware of the deep, toxic family history laced into the speech. Down in the VIP section, Chloe could not contain herself. She was practically glowing with malicious joy. She twisted completely around in her premium seat, ignoring the vice admiral sitting right next to her. She scanned the rising tiers of the bleachers, her eyes darting over the sea of guests, until she finally located me, sitting alone at the very top, relegated to row Z. When her eyes locked onto mine, a nasty, triumphant smirk spread across her perfectly made-up face. She raised her hands and clapped slowly, making sure I saw her absolute delight in my public humiliation. "Look at us," her cruel smile silently screamed. "Look at where you are and look at where we are." I did not flinch. I did not look away. I did not give her the satisfaction of seeing a single muscle in my face tighten. I simply stared back at her with a cold, clinical emptiness. My attention was not actually on Marcus's pathetic chest-thumping performance, nor was it on Chloe's petty gloating. My eyes were actively tracking the subtle, highly coordinated movements happening at the far edges of the crowd. To my left, near the primary exit archway reserved for VIP guests, a man in a sharp, unassuming civilian suit casually checked his watch. He adjusted his stance, placing himself perfectly in the center of the walkway. To the right of the main stage, standing near the access ramp leading to the administrative buildings, a woman in a standard Navy dress uniform shifted her weight. She seamlessly stepped in front of the access gate, her posture relaxed but undeniably vigilant. They were Joint Special Operations Command operatives. My operatives. Highly trained, completely invisible to the untrained eye, and absolute masters of spatial control. They were not there to watch a graduation. They were there to build a cage. I caught the eye of the man in the suit. Over the heads of 1,000 cheering guests across 100 yards of bright morning sunlight, he gave me a single, barely perceptible nod. I smoothly shifted my gaze to the woman on the right. She mirrored the exact same gesture, her hand resting casually just inches from her concealed sidearm. The perimeter was locked, the main exits were choked, the net was fully cast, and the Harrison family had willingly walked right into the dead center of it. I gave a slow, deliberate nod of confirmation back to my team. On the stage, Marcus was wrapping up his speech to a crescendo of applause. But my eyes darted away from his smiling face to the background of the stage. Standing just behind the heavy velvet curtains, Captain Vance's adjutant had suddenly appeared. The young lieutenant looked visibly pale, his jaw clenched tight. He was holding a heavily encrypted military-grade tablet. He stepped forward, interrupting the ceremonial flow, and urgently tapped Captain Vance on the shoulder. The base commander leaned back from the podium, clearly annoyed by the breach of protocol. The adjutant whispered rapidly into the captain's ear and handed him the tablet. From the top row of the bleachers, I watched the exact second the digital payload I had launched from the restaurant parking lot detonated in the real world. Captain Vance looked down at the glowing screen. I knew exactly what he was seeing. The offshore bank routing numbers, the falsified invoices from Calvin Harrison's transport company, the irrefutable, unalterable digital footprint of Marcus's bribes to the BUD/S medical staff. The hard, undeniable proof that the man currently smiling at the crowd was a complete and utter fraud. Captain Vance's posture went completely rigid. The ceremonial pride vanished from his weathered face, replaced instantly by a look of furious, cold disgust. He slowly raised his eyes from the tablet. He did not look at the cheering crowd. He did not look at the vice admiral in the front row. Captain Vance looked directly at Marcus's back. Then slowly his furious gaze drifted down to the front row, locking dead onto Calvin Harrison's beaming, arrogant face. Down below, Chloe turned back around to face the stage, still smiling her toxic smile, entirely ignorant of the fact that the ground beneath her expensive designer heels was about to violently give way. Captain Vance did not halt the ceremony. A public scene on the grinder in front of hundreds of civilians and the press was completely against Navy protocol. But the air around the podium had flash frozen. He moved through the final dismissals with a mechanical, clipped efficiency entirely devoid of the ceremonial warmth he had displayed just moments prior. When the final command was given, and the graduates broke formation, the customary photo opportunity with the base commander was conspicuously absent. Vance turned his back on the front row, completely ignoring Calvin Harrison's outstretched hand, and marched directly toward the administrative wing with his adjutant close behind. My father simply blinked, his thick hand suspended in the empty air. I watched from the top of the bleachers as he quickly recovered, smoothing his jacket and laughing loudly, clearly rationalizing the slight as a sudden matter of urgent military business. He turned to Marcus, slapping him on the back, instantly engulfed in a swarm of well-wishers and sycophants. They were completely oblivious to the fact that the man who had just pinned the trident on Marcus was currently mobilizing the base's Judge Advocate General Corps. I took my time descending the metal steps. I let the crowd thin out, allowing the sea of white uniforms and pastel dresses to flow toward the various reception areas scattered across the base. The general admission crowd was directed toward the main mess halls and outdoor pavilions. The elite, however, were making their way toward the Admiral's Club, a highly secure private banquet facility reserved strictly for top brass distinguished dignitaries and the immediate families of the honored graduates. I walked at a steady, measured pace. The California sun was bright, casting long, sharp shadows across the manicured lawns of the base. I did not check my phone again. The digital snare was perfectly set. Now it was time to watch them walk into the physical one. The entrance to the Admiral's Club was imposing. Heavy tinted glass doors were flanked by 2 armed sentries in crisp uniforms standing beside a digital security pedestal. The patio outside the doors was already buzzing with high-ranking officers holding crystal flutes of champagne, mingling with wealthy families. As I approached the base of the wide stone steps leading up to the entrance, I saw her. Chloe had positioned herself right at the threshold, perfectly intercepting anyone attempting to walk through the doors. She held a fresh glass of champagne, her posture radiating an absurd level of unearned authority. She was practically vibrating with the thrill of her new proximity to military power. She was scanning the approaching crowd, playing the role of the elite gatekeeper. Her eyes landed on me. The smug, condescending smile that had been plastered on her face all morning instantly sharpened into a look of territorial hostility. She stepped forward, planting herself directly in the center of the walkway, completely blocking my path to the glass doors. She held up her free hand, palm facing outward, her chin tilted up to look down her nose at me. "Zuri, stop right there," Chloe commanded, her voice loud enough to draw the attention of several nearby officers and guests. She let out a sharp, mocking sigh, shaking her head, as if dealing with a lost, particularly stubborn child. "I really cannot believe you actually followed us here. Did you not understand a single word Marcus said up on that stage?" I stopped on the step just below her, my hands resting loosely at my sides. I maintained a completely blank clinical expression, allowing her to dig her own grave as deep as she possibly could. "This area is restricted, Zuri," she continued, her tone dripping with venomous condescension. "This reception is exclusively for high-ranking officers and the direct, respectable families of the elite graduates. It is a place for people who honor the uniform." She gestured wildly with her champagne glass toward the sprawling base behind me. "The civilian overflow area is back by the mess hall. They have generic punch and folding chairs. That is where you belong. You are not going to stain Marcus's perfect image by lingering around people of actual prestige." Denise suddenly appeared behind Chloe, her face flushing with anger as she realized I had ignored her previous orders. She reached out, gripping Chloe's shoulder in a show of unified hostility. "I told you to stay out of sight," my mother hissed, her voice a harsh, frantic whisper. "We are currently sitting at a table with the Vice Admiral." If you walk in there looking like a lost civilian, they will ask questions. They will ask what you do. I will not be humiliated by having to admit my daughter is a data entry clerk who could not even survive basic training. Turn around and walk away right now, or your father will have base security escort you off the premises. I did not offer a single word of defense. I did not argue, and I certainly did not turn around. The absolute silence emanating from me seemed to infuriate them even more. They thrived on chaos, on shouting matches, on making me yield to their aggression. My utter lack of a reaction was short-circuiting their usual tactics. I stepped up onto the landing, closing the distance, so I was standing directly in front of Chloe and my mother. Chloe bristled, her eyes flashing with outrage, preparing to shout for the sentries. I calmly raised my left hand. Held lightly between my index and middle finger was a solid black identification card. It lacked the standard barcodes or generic military insignia of a regular access pass. It bore only a gold-embedded microchip and a specialized holographic seal. Without breaking eye contact with Chloe, I extended my arm and tapped the solid black card against the digital security pedestal standing beside the sentries. For a fraction of a second, nothing happened. Then the machine let out a sharp, high-pitched chirp. The heavy LED ring circling the scanner, which normally glowed a standard blue for authorized guests, instantly flashed a brilliant, blinding emerald green. The reaction from the two armed sentries was immediate and violently precise. They did not just step aside. They snapped to attention with bone-rattling force, their boots cracking against the concrete. They executed a flawless, rigid salute, their eyes fixed straight ahead, their bodies locked into a posture of absolute, unyielding respect. Chloe's mouth fell open. The champagne in her glass sloshed dangerously close to the rim as her hand began to shake. She looked at the glowing green light on the machine, then at the rigid sentries, and finally back to me, her brain completely unable to process the data it was receiving. "Excuse me," Chloe stammered, her voice suddenly high and breathless, turning toward the nearest sentry. "What are you doing? The machine must be broken. She is just a civilian. She is a dropout. Her card has to be a fake. You need to rescan that." The sentry did not move a single muscle. He did not look at her. He remained locked in his salute, his voice booming across the patio with mechanical precision. "Clearance level verified. Welcome to the Admiral's Club, ma'am." Denise took a stumbling step backward, her hand flying to her chest. The color completely drained from her face as she stared at the sentries, the reality of the situation finally beginning to pierce through her thick armor of denial. The prestige she worshipped, the military hierarchy she desperately wanted to be a part of, was currently bowing directly to the daughter she had just called a failure. I lowered my hand, sliding the black card smoothly back into my pocket. I looked at Chloe's pale, terrified face and offered her a slow, chilling smile. "Excuse me," I said, my voice quiet, smooth, and entirely devoid of mercy. "You are blocking my path." I stepped past her, my shoulder brushing lightly against hers. She flinched as if I had burned her, stumbling back against my mother. I walked through the heavy glass doors, stepping onto the plush carpet of the opulent reception hall. The room was filled with gold-trimmed crystal chandeliers and dozens of high-ranking military officials enjoying catered hors d'oeuvres. Just as I crossed the threshold, a sudden silence fell over the front of the room. The low murmur of conversation instantly evaporated. The heavy mahogany double doors at the far end of the hall swung open with a resounding crash. A massive security detail filed into the room, fanning out with rapid tactical precision. Walking directly behind them was a man whose presence commanded absolute, unquestioning authority. He wore a uniform heavy with 4 gleaming silver stars on each shoulder. It was General Thomas Wright, the Supreme Commander of the Joint Special Operations Command. He was the highest-ranking military official on the West Coast, a man who answered only to the Secretary of Defense and the President. The entire room of officers scrambled to their feet, glasses clinking as they rapidly came to attention. General Wright did not look at the base commander. He did not look at the vice admiral sitting at my father's table. He strode directly across the center of the silent room, his eyes scanning the crowd, until they locked onto me standing just inside the entryway. His stern, battle-hardened face broke into a sharp, deeply respectful smile. He bypassed every single flag officer in the room, walking straight toward me with his hand extended. Colonel, it is a profound honor to finally meet you in person. General Wright said, his deep, resonant voice easily cutting through the ambient noise of the VIP reception hall. He gripped my hand with a firm, decisive strength that communicated absolute respect. Your team's intelligence packet arrived precisely on schedule this morning. The tactical precision of your cyber division is nothing short of extraordinary. You have likely saved this command from a catastrophic security compromise. Thank you, General, I replied, keeping my voice perfectly level and my expression entirely professional. The grip of my handshake matched his, projecting the quiet authority I had spent over a decade building in the shadows. We serve at the pleasure of the command. I am merely ensuring our operational integrity remains uncorrupted. The exchange lasted only a few seconds, but the shockwave it sent through the immediate vicinity was palpable. A tight circle of highly decorated captains and rear admirals who had been mingling near the entrance suddenly fell silent, their eyes darting between the four-star commander of the Joint Special Operations Command and the civilian woman in the charcoal suit he was addressing with such profound deference. The social hierarchy of the room had shifted instantly, reorienting itself entirely around our brief interaction. But true to form, Calvin Harrison was completely blind to anything that did not directly serve his own monstrous ego. Before General Wright could utter another word, a heavy disruptive force plowed through the refined elegance of the gathering. My father bulldozed his way past a group of distinguished senior officers, his large frame taking up entirely too much space, his movements clumsy and aggressive. He was gripping Marcus tightly by the bicep, practically dragging my brother through the crowd like a prized hunting dog being led to a showcase. Calvin was sweating slightly, his face flushed with a toxic mixture of expensive scotch and raw, unadulterated greed. His eyes were locked with a predatory intensity onto the 4 silver stars gleaming on General Wright's shoulders. This was his ultimate target. This was the pinnacle of his pathetic social climbing. To Calvin, a 4-star general was not a military leader, but a walking, talking defense contract waiting to be exploited. He did not even register the fact that General Wright was currently engaged in a private conversation. He certainly did not register that the conversation was with me. To my father, I was nothing more than an inconvenient piece of furniture occupying space in a room where I did not belong. He stepped aggressively forward, physically forcing his way into the tight space, and forcing me to take a half step back to avoid his heavy elbow. General Wright. What an absolute privilege, Calvin boomed, his voice far too loud, shattering the dignified hum of the room. He thrust out a thick, glossy business card with gold-embossed lettering, shoving it directly into the space between the general's chest and my shoulder. Calvin Harrison, CEO of Harrison Global Logistics. We currently handle major transport and supply chain routing for the Pacific Fleet out of San Diego. I have been meaning to get a direct audience with JSOC Procurement regarding your specialized equipment transport needs. We offer unparalleled discretion and off-the-books routing efficiencies that could save your command millions. It was a crass, desperate, and wildly inappropriate pitch. The sheer vulgarity of launching into a transactional business proposal at a private graduation reception was staggering. Several officers standing nearby actually took a physical step backward, creating a wide berth around my father, as if his profound lack of self-awareness was a contagious disease. But Calvin, entirely tone-deaf and fueled by his own narcissism, pushed forward, interpreting the stunned silence of the room as captivated attention. He suddenly yanked Marcus forward by the shoulder, roughly maneuvering him to stand shoulder to shoulder with the general. And this fine young man is my son, Marcus Harrison. Calvin announced, his chest puffing out. So far, the buttons on his blazer strained against the fabric. He just had the trident pinned on his chest 20 minutes ago. Class speaker, top of the line, the absolute best of the best. We are a family that bleeds military excellence, General. A family that understands what it takes to support the elite operators under your command. I am sure you recognize a true warrior when you see one. Marcus stood tall, puffing out his own chest and adjusting the collar of his pristine white dress uniform. He arranged his face into a mask of stoic, hardened pride. He looked directly at General Wright, fully expecting the 4-star commander to extend a welcoming hand, to offer a brotherly embrace to validate the arrogant speech he had just delivered on the grinder. Marcus expected to be recognized as a peer by the most powerful military man in the hemisphere. The air temperature in our immediate circle seemed to plummet straight to absolute zero. General Thomas Wright did not reach out to take the gold-embossed business card. He did not offer his hand to Marcus. His battle-hardened face, which just moments ago had been lined with a warm, respectful smile, directed at me, transformed into a mask of glacial, terrifying indifference. The silence that stretched between them was agonizing. It was a heavy, suffocating vacuum that slowly began to crush the oxygen right out of my father's lungs. Calvin's outstretched hand, still gripping the glossy card, began to tremble slightly. The red flush on his cheeks darkened into an unhealthy mottled purple as the horrible reality of his social miscalculation began to set in. General Wright looked at the business card floating awkwardly in the air. He then shifted his gaze slowly and deliberately, taking in Calvin's sweating, eager face. Finally, those slate-gray eyes moved to Marcus. The general looked at the shiny new trident pinned to my brother's chest. There was no respect in that gaze. There was no recognition of brotherhood. There was only a profound, freezing contempt, the look of a man who already knew every single dirty, fraudulent secret, hiding beneath that crisp white uniform. The general let the silence hang for another 5 agonizing seconds, ensuring the humiliation baked deep into their bones. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement, General Wright simply adjusted his stance. He did not utter a single word to my father. He did not acknowledge Marcus's existence or the uniform he wore. General Wright turned his broad shoulders a precise 45 degrees, effectively creating a solid wall of absolute military authority that completely shut Calvin and Marcus out of the circle. He moved with the smooth, undeniable grace of a man swatting away a particularly annoying insect without even looking at it. He turned his attention entirely back to me. The glacial freeze melted from his features, instantly replaced once again by that deep, unwavering professional respect. As I was saying, Colonel General Wright continued, his voice warm and perfectly modulated, carrying easily over the stunned silence of the surrounding crowd. The strategic restructuring your division proposed last quarter has already been implemented across our secure networks. I would value the opportunity to have you brief my senior staff on the new cryptographic protocols when you return to Virginia. I held the general's gaze, offering a calm, composed nod. I would be happy to arrange a secure briefing schedule with your adjutant general. The new protocols will ensure that internal vulnerabilities and compromised assets are identified with absolute certainty before they can cause structural damage to the command. Excellent, General Wright replied, a knowing glint flashing in his eyes. Absolute certainty is precisely what we require when dealing with compromised assets. I briefly allowed my eyes to flick past the general's broad shoulder. Calvin Harrison was still standing exactly where he had been brutally dismissed. His hand remained suspended uselessly in the air, the gold-embossed business card trembling between his thick fingers. The arrogant, boastful energy had been completely drained from his body, leaving behind a hollow, pathetic shell of a man who suddenly realized that his wealth and his bluster were entirely worthless in the face of genuine power. Beside him, Marcus looked as though he had been physically struck. The smug, elite warrior persona he had worn on the stage had shattered into a million jagged pieces. His jaw was clenched so tightly, the muscles trembled, and a dark, humiliating red flush crept up his neck, swallowing the pristine white collar of his uniform. The 4-star commander of JSOC had looked directly at his highly coveted trident and treated him like an absolute ghost. The rejection was absolute, public, and utterly devastating. Neither of them dared to speak. Neither of them dared to move. They were trapped in the humiliating, suffocating gravity of their own profound insignificance. I turned my attention back to the general, a cold, clinical satisfaction settling deep in my chest as I left my father and brother to drown quietly in the background. General Wright took a half step back. He was a man who understood battlefield dynamics intimately, and he had clearly assessed the hostile terrain I had just been navigating. He knew exactly what Calvin and Marcus had been trying to do, and he decided to formally and publicly obliterate their existence. He squared his broad shoulders, brought his polished boots together with a sharp, echoing crack that cut straight through the dead silence of the VIP room, and snapped his right hand up to his brow in a flawless, rigid salute. Just cleaning up the mess. Colonel Harrison, "It is a profound honor," General Wright said, his deep, resonant voice cutting effortlessly through the ambient noise of the VIP reception hall. He gripped my hand with a firm, decisive strength that communicated absolute, unwavering respect. I did not expect Cyber Command to send their director in person. The entire reception hall froze. The soft hum of classical music, the clinking of expensive crystal, the low murmur of self-important conversations, all of it simply ceased to exist. Time itself seemed to suspend in the heavy, oxygen-starved air. Dozens of highly decorated captains and rear admirals who had been mingling nearby suddenly fell silent, their eyes darting between the four-star commander of the Joint Special Operations Command and the civilian woman in the charcoal suit he was addressing with such profound deference. The social hierarchy of the room had shifted instantly, reorienting itself entirely around our brief interaction. I smoothly brought my hand up, returning the general's salute with crisp, practiced precision before accepting his handshake. "The honor is mine, General Wright," I replied, my voice steady and commanding, projecting easily across the silent room. When the operational integrity of our armed forces is involved, I prefer to oversee the protocols personally. Before the general could respond, a frantic, highly agitated voice broke the stunned silence. "General, sir, you are mistaken." Marcus stepped forward, practically shoving his way past a stunned rear admiral. His face was a dark mottled red, clashing violently with his pristine white dress uniform. The arrogant, untouchable hero persona he had worn on the stage just an hour ago had completely evaporated. He looked frantic, his chest heaving, his eyes wide with a desperate need to correct what he believed was a massive, humiliating error. He could not fathom a reality where the most powerful military man in the hemisphere was showing deference to his outcast sister. Marcus stopped a few feet away, rigidly coming to attention, though his voice betrayed his absolute panic. "General Wright, sir, with all due respect, you are confusing her with someone else. That is my sister Zuri. She is not a colonel. She is a boot camp dropout. She could not even make it past the first month of basic training. She is just a low-level civilian clerk." The air temperature in our immediate circle seemed to plummet straight to absolute zero. General Thomas Wright did not immediately respond. He slowly turned his broad shoulders, shifting his gaze from me to the newly minted ensign standing before him. The general looked at the shiny new trident pinned to my brother's chest. There was no respect in that gaze. There was no recognition of brotherhood. There was only a profound, freezing contempt. "Dropout," General Wright repeated the word, rolling off his tongue with a dangerous, quiet edge. He took a single, deliberate step toward Marcus. The sheer physical presence of the four-star commander forced my brother to instinctively take a half-step backward, his polished boots scraping awkwardly against the carpet. "Ensign," General Wright said, his voice cracking like a whip across the dead, silent room. "Colonel Harrison did not drop out. She was secretly extracted and recruited by Army military intelligence in her second week of basic training because her genius-level intellect was entirely wasted on infantry drills. She is the architect of the most sophisticated digital defense infrastructure on the planet. She currently holds life and death power over the entirety of JSOC's cybersecurity network. You will address her with the respect her rank and her unparalleled service demand. Do I make myself absolutely clear?" The silence that followed was absolute and suffocating. Somewhere to my right, the fragile crystal of a champagne flute slipped from numb fingers. It hit the polished hardwood floor, shattering into 1,000 glittering pieces. The sharp crash echoed through the hall. I shifted my gaze. Chloe was standing just a few feet away, her hands hovering uselessly in the air where her drink had been seconds before. The smug, vicious arrogance that had defined her entire existence had completely melted away, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated terror. Her mouth hung open, but her vocal cords were entirely paralyzed. She was staring at me as if I had just risen from the dead. The realization was violently rewiring her brain. The woman she had physically assaulted in the parking lot, the woman she had mocked and tried to banish to the overflow bleachers, was not a failure. I was a ghost. I was a predator, operating at a level of authority her precious Vice Admiral father could only dream of reaching. A few yards behind her, my mother Denise was leaning heavily against a cocktail table, her face the color of wet ash. She had spent her entire morning desperate to hide me from her new elite social circle. She had forced a ticket for the back row into my hand, terrified I would humiliate her. Now the Supreme Commander of JSOC was publicly validating my existence in front of everyone she worshipped. Her entire social climbing fantasy had just been completely and irrevocably incinerated. But it was Calvin Harrison's reaction that truly defined the sickening core of his character. My father had been standing frozen near the bar, watching the entire exchange. For a normal parent, this moment would have brought a crushing wave of guilt. A normal father would have realized the magnitude of his neglect, the sheer cruelty of dismissing his daughter for decades while celebrating a fraudulent son. Calvin felt none of that. As the general's words washed over the room, as the reality of my power and my position finally sank in, I watched his brain skip entirely over remorse and land squarely on raw, unfiltered greed. His eyes widened, practically vibrating in their sockets. He looked at General Wright, then at me. He did not see a daughter. He saw a 4-star general showing absolute deference to his flesh and blood. He saw Pentagon defense contracts. He saw unregulated access to the highest echelons of military procurement. He saw a golden goose. Calvin's posture changed instantly. The shock vanished, replaced by an oily, terrifyingly bright smile. He practically bulldozed his way through the frozen crowd of officers, ignoring protocol, ignoring the shattered glass on the floor, and ignoring Marcus's pale, trembling form. He rushed directly toward me, throwing his arms open wide. Before I could step back, he grabbed me by the forearm, pulling me close and slapping his heavy hand onto my shoulder. "Oh my God, my darling daughter," Calvin boomed, his voice echoing with a sickening manufactured warmth. He looked around the room, beaming at the stunned officers as if he had orchestrated this entire moment himself. "I knew it. I always knew you were our absolute pride and joy. Look at you. A colonel, controlling the entire cyber network. I always told your mother you were destined for greatness." He squeezed my arm tightly, leaning in so close I could smell the expensive scotch on his breath. His eyes were manic, glittering with opportunistic hunger. He completely ignored the fact that he had not spoken a single kind word to me in over a decade. "Listen," Zuri Calvin continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial, urgent pitch. "We need to celebrate this properly. This base reception is entirely too crowded. Come on, let us get out of here. We are going back to the mansion right now. We will open the vintage champagne. We will host a massive family cookout. Your mother will prepare all your favorites." He leaned even closer, his fingers digging sharply into the wool fabric of my suit jacket. "Plus, Dad has some very, very important business to discuss with you right away. With your clearance and my logistics fleet, the synergy we could create would be absolutely unstoppable. We need to talk contracts, sweetheart. We need to talk about our future." I looked at the thick, sweaty hand gripping my arm. I looked at his greedy, desperate eyes. He was offering me the exact thing I had craved as a child. He was offering me a place at his table. He was offering me his pride, his attention, and his validation. He thought I was stupid enough to accept it. He thought his sudden, transparent affection would erase a lifetime of emotional abandonment. He thought he had won. I maintained my cold, clinical composure. I did not pull my arm away. I did not scream at him or expose his hypocrisy. I simply looked directly into my father's manic eyes and allowed a slow, perfectly polite smile to spread across my face. Behind the scenes, my cyber division's data packet was already sitting on the base commander's desk. Captain Vance was likely mobilizing the Judge Advocate General Corps at this exact second. The digital guillotine had already been dropped, but the blade had not quite reached their necks. Arresting them here in a crowded VIP hall would be messy. Letting them go back to their sprawling, ostentatious mansion, letting them uncork their expensive champagne and revel in their false sense of victory, before the military police kicked their front doors off the hinges, that was a far more fitting execution. "A family cookout sounds wonderful, Dad," I said smoothly, my voice entirely devoid of sarcasm. "I would not miss it for the world. We definitely have a lot of business to discuss." Calvin beamed, completely oblivious to the venom hiding just beneath my polite tone. He clapped General Wright on the shoulder, a massive breach of protocol that the general accepted with a stony, unblinking glare. "You hear that?" General Calvin laughed loudly. "Family first. We are heading out to celebrate my brilliant daughter. Calvin turned and marched toward the exit, snapping his fingers at Denise and Marcus to follow. My mother scrambled after him, stepping carefully around the broken glass, her head bowed. Marcus stumbled behind them, his face ashen, looking like a man walking toward his own funeral. I exchanged one final knowing look with General Wright. He offered a slow, almost imperceptible nod of understanding. I turned and followed my family out of the Admiral's Club, walking out into the bright California sun. I smiled as I walked toward my rental car. The trap was locked. They were heading home to celebrate their salvation, entirely unaware that they were actually driving straight into their own spectacular annihilation. The thick, sweet smoke of burning hickory and expensive barbecue glaze drifted lazily across the sprawling, manicured lawns of the Harrison estate. Calvin had spared absolutely no expense for his annual Juneteenth cookout. A massive, custom-built outdoor kitchen dominated the patio, manned by a team of private chefs, flipping prime cuts of Wagyu beef and butterflied lobsters over open flames. A live jazz band played softly near the edge of the infinity pool, providing a sophisticated soundtrack to the clinking of crystal glasses and the loud, boastful laughter of local politicians, wealthy contractors, and socialites. It was a picture of perfect, unbothered American prosperity. It was also a stage, and the actors were currently delivering the most desperate, pathetic performances of their entire lives. Just 6 hours prior, I had been the family pariah. I was the stain on their immaculate image, the basic training washout, who needed to be hidden in the overflow bleachers of the naval base so I wouldn't contaminate their proximity to elite military brass. Now the entire gravitational pull of the Harrison household had violently reversed, and I was the sun they were all desperately trying to orbit. I stood near the edge of the patio, wearing a simple, elegant sundress I had changed into after the ceremony. I held a glass of iced water, watching the grotesque display of hypocrisy unfold before me with the detached clinical fascination of a scientist observing a colony of panicked ants. Zuri, my beautiful, brilliant girl. The high-pitched, syrupy voice belonged to my mother. Denise practically tripped over her expensive wedges as she hurried across the stone patio toward me. She was carrying a porcelain plate piled high with perfectly charred ribs, gourmet potato salad, and grilled asparagus. Her face, which had been contorted with venomous disgust in the VIP lounge just hours ago, was now stretched into a painful, beaming mask of absolute maternal devotion. "You must be absolutely starving after such a long morning," Denise cooed, shoving the heavy plate directly into my hands. "I specifically told the head chef to set aside the absolute best cut of the brisket just for you. You know how much I worry about you eating properly with that incredibly important, stressful job of yours." I looked down at the plate, then back up into my mother's eyes. They were wide and frantic, pleading with me to play along with this sudden manufactured reality. She was terrified. She was trying to bury her lifetime of neglect under a mountain of barbecue sauce and fake affection. "Thank you, Denise," I said smoothly, deliberately omitting the word mother. "The brisket looks perfectly adequate." Denise flinched slightly at the cold formality of my tone, but her desperate smile remained glued to her face. "Oh, please, anything for my colonel. We are just so immensely proud of you, sweetheart. We always knew you were destined for absolute greatness." Always. Before I could respond to that breathtaking lie, a new figure stepped into my peripheral vision. Chloe appeared at my right elbow. The Vice Admiral's daughter, the woman who had physically shoved me in a parking lot and tried to banish me from the reception hall, was now holding a crystal tumbler of top-shelf bourbon on a silver tray. Her knuckles were bone white from gripping the edge of the tray so tightly. The muscles in her jaw feathered as she forced herself to swallow every ounce of her patrician pride. Her father had dragged her away in disgust at the base, but Calvin's immediate spin control and the sheer blinding gravity of my 4-star connections had clearly forced her back into the fold. Her greed ultimately was much stronger than her dignity. "I noticed you did not have a proper drink, Zuri," Chloe said, her voice tight, strained, and painfully submissive. "I had the bartender pour you the 20-year-aged Pappy Van Winkle. Calvin said it was your favorite." She extended the silver tray toward me, lowering her eyes, adopting the exact posture of a hired waitress. I took the crystal tumbler, letting my fingertips brush the cold glass before lifting it. "You remembered," I said softly, taking a slow, deliberate sip, my eyes never leaving her flushed, humiliated face. "How incredibly thoughtful of you, Chloe. Your hospitality is truly a marvel to witness." Chloe swallowed hard, a dark flush creeping up her neck. She forced a stiff, agonizing nod. "We are family now. We have to look out for each other." I smiled, a sharp, cold curving of my lips. "Indeed we do." All right, give her some room. Let the woman breathe." Calvin's booming, jovial voice shattered the tense air. My father pushed his way through a group of local city councilmen, clapping his hands together like a ringmaster. He was sweating heavily, his tailored polo shirt clinging to his chest, his eyes shining with a frantic, predatory energy. He wrapped a heavy, possessive arm around my shoulders, turning me to face the crowd. "Look at her," Calvin practically shouted, making sure every wealthy investor and politician on the patio was listening. "My daughter, Director of Cyber Command, the invisible shield of the United States military. I tell you, raising a genius is not easy, but the payoff is absolute perfection." A chorus of polite, sycophantic laughter rippled through the crowd. Calvin squeezed my shoulder, his grip tightening like a vice. "Zuri, sweetheart," Calvin said, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial rumble intended only for my ears. "The party is great, but you and I have some highly sensitive, highly lucrative family business to discuss. Come with me." He did not wait for an answer. He turned and began guiding me firmly away from the patio, navigating through the lavishly decorated hallways of the mansion. The music and the chatter faded as we moved deeper into the house, finally arriving at the heavy, soundproofed double doors of his private study. Calvin ushered me inside and quickly turned around. I heard the heavy metallic thud of the deadbolt sliding into place. The study was a monument to his ego. Dark mahogany walls, rich leather furniture, and shelves lined with fake decorative books he had never read. The air smelled of stale cigar smoke and expensive cologne. Calvin moved directly behind his massive executive desk. He did not offer me a seat. The jovial, proud father routine vanished the instant the lock clicked. He was purely transactional now. He reached into a locked drawer and pulled out a thick, heavy dossier bound in dark blue leather. He slammed it down onto the center of the desk. $50 million, Zuri," Calvin said, his voice dropping into a breathless, greedy whisper. $50 million in continuous guaranteed federal funding over the next 5 years. This is a primary logistics and transport contract for the Department of Defense. It covers the entire Pacific Fleet supply chain. I stepped forward, looking down at the heavy binder. "That is a massive operational undertaking," I noted, keeping my tone perfectly neutral. "It requires top-tier security clearance and pristine corporate vetting." "Exactly," Calvin said, pointing a thick finger at the dossier. "And that is exactly where the problem lies. The Pentagon's automated cyber vetting protocols have become a complete nightmare. They have these invasive algorithms that dig into offshore accounts, corporate structuring, and shell company routing. It is bureaucratic red tape designed to strangle honest businessmen like me." He leaned across the desk, his eyes wide and manic, his breath hot in the quiet room. "But you control those algorithms, Zuri. You are the director of the entire digital infrastructure. You have the access codes to the JSOC security mainframes. You can flag Harrison Global Logistics as a pre-vetted Level A secure entity. You can bypass the automated audits. You can whitelist us." I stared at him, letting the absolute magnitude of his treasonous request hang in the air. He was not asking for a favor. He was asking me to compromise the national security apparatus of the United States military to line his own pockets. "That is a highly illegal manipulation of a federal defense network," I stated smoothly. "The audit protocols exist to prevent compromised assets from infiltrating the supply chain." "We are not compromised assets, we are family," Calvin shot back, waving his hand as if swatting away a fly. "Listen to me. Marcus is already on board. He is the golden boy. He has the trident. He is going to be the public face of the company's military liaison division. With his elite hero status, shaking hands in the boardroom, And you acting as the invisible shield in the mainframe, protecting our financial structures from audits, we are completely untouchable. He rounded the desk, stepping close to me, his voice trembling with the vision of his own unchecked power. We will not just be rich Zuri, we will be a dynasty. We will be the most powerful family in the defense sector. You will never have to worry about a government salary again. I will set up offshore accounts in your name. We run the supply lines, you run the digital cover. It is a flawless system. I looked into my father's eyes. There was not a trace of hesitation, not a shred of moral conflict. He was fully prepared to sell out his country leverage, his son's fraudulent military honors, and implicate his daughter in massive federal treason, all to secure a fatter bank account. He truly believed that everyone in the world was as corrupt, as shallow, and as easily bought as he was. He thought I was finally seeking his approval. He thought I was finally desperate enough to join his criminal enterprise. I reached out, resting my hand lightly on the cover of the blue dossier. I could feel the microscopic encrypted audio transmitter hidden inside the pearl button of my dress, capturing every single syllable of his confession. My Joint Special Operations Command team was currently logging the entire conversation in real time, preparing the final irrefutable charges of conspiracy and federal bribery. I looked up at Calvin, allowing a slow, brilliant smile to spread across my face. It was the smile of a predator, watching the trapdoor finally slam shut. "You are right, Dad," I said softly, tapping the dossier. "This is a flawless system, and I know exactly what needs to be done with this contract." Calvin let out a sharp, triumphant bark of laughter. He slapped his hand down on the heavy mahogany desk, his face practically glowing with unadulterated greed. He completely missed the cold, lethal edge in my voice. He was so blinded by his own narcissism, so entirely convinced of his own persuasive brilliance, that he believed he had just bought a full bird kernel for the price of a backyard barbecue and a few hollow compliments. "I knew you had the Harrison business instinct in your blood, Zuri. I knew it." Calvin turned his back to me and strode over to a crystal decanter sitting on a silver tray near the window. He poured a generous measure of amber liquid into 2 heavy glasses. "We are going to be unstoppable. The Pentagon will practically be writing us blank checks. To the Harrison dynasty." He turned around, extending one of the glasses toward me. I did not take it. Instead, I reached down into my tailored leather briefcase resting by my feet. I bypassed the civilian tablet I used for public presentations and withdrew a heavy matte black Panasonic Toughbook. It was a military-issued heavily modified machine designed for secure compartmented information facility operations, commonly known as a SCIF laptop. It was built to withstand a bomb blast and featured encryption protocols that would take a supercomputer a millennium to crack. I set the heavy machine down directly on top of his gold-embossed $50 million logistics dossier. Calvin paused, the crystal glasses hovering in the air. "What is that?" "We do not need to do the paperwork right this second, sweetheart. Have a drink. Celebrate." I opened the heavy lid. The screen remained dark until I pressed my thumb against the biometric scanner embedded in the chassis. A red laser quickly swept across my retina. The machine hummed to life, bypassing the mansion's unsecured internet entirely and establishing a direct, heavily encrypted satellite uplink to the Department of Defense mainframe in Virginia. "I do not drink while conducting federal operations." "Dad," I said, my voice dropping its polite veneer, settling into the cold, authoritative cadence I used when addressing hostile combatants. Calvin's smile faltered slightly. The absolute lack of warmth in my eyes finally seemed to register through his scotch-soaked haze. He set the glasses down and slowly approached the desk, peering over the top of the monitor. Lines of highly classified, rapidly scrolling code reflected in his widened eyes. "Zuri, what are you doing? We just agreed on the system. You just said you knew what to do with the contract." "I did," I replied, my fingers moving across the reinforced keyboard with blinding speed. "I am running a final diagnostic on Harrison Global Logistics, a deep dive into the corporate routing numbers you so graciously provided in your proposal." Calvin chuckled nervously, a bead of sweat tracing its way down his temple. "Well, there is no need to dig too deep, right? We are keeping this in the family. Just push the approval through the back door. Whitelist the corporate ID, like we discussed." I hit the final command key. The screen flashed bright crimson, pulling up a deeply buried, highly classified network of offshore shell companies, falsified shipping manifests, and doctored manufacturing blueprints. I grabbed the heavy laptop and slowly rotated it around, pushing it across the desk so the screen was facing him directly. "Did you actually think I came here to celebrate?" I asked, my voice deadly quiet, stripping away the last remaining shred of the obedient daughter illusion. "Did you honestly think I did not know your company falsified capabilities and supplied substandard materials to military bases?" Calvin stared at the screen. The color rapidly drained from his face, leaving his skin a sickly, mottled gray. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. The red glow of the monitor illuminated his absolute terror. Displayed in high definition were the exact routing numbers he used to purchase cheap, compromised Chinese steel, which he had then fraudulently relabeled and sold to the Navy for armored transport vehicles. The screen showed the exact dates he had bribed safety inspectors to look the other way, when his transport ships failed basic structural integrity audits. Cyber Command saw everything. I saw everything. Zuri Calvin stammered, his hands flying up to grip the edge of the desk to keep his knees from buckling. "Zuri, wait. This is a misunderstanding. Those are internal supply chain adjustments. It is standard industry practice. You cannot take this out of context. You are my daughter. You have to protect me. I am an officer of the United States Armed Forces," I stated, stepping forward until I was leaning over the desk, forcing him to look me in the eye. "And you are a domestic terrorist who put the lives of active duty personnel at severe risk to pad your own offshore accounts." I reached out and hit a single isolated key on the board. The red screen flashed green. A confirmation prompt appeared in bold block letters. "Data transfer complete. Your file is not just rejected," I said, my voice echoing with absolute terrifying finality. "The Pentagon just transferred your entire corporate dossier, along with all of your offshore banking records, directly to the Department of Justice. At 8 o'clock tomorrow morning, the FBI will lock down this company and raid this mansion for federal fraud." Calvin let out a strangled, agonizing gasp. He staggered backward, his hands flying up to clutch violently at his chest. The expensive fabric of his polo shirt wrinkled as his fingers dug into his own skin. He stumbled against the heavy leather armchair, his breathing coming in short, erratic, panic-stricken wheezes. The sheer magnitude of his destruction was hitting his nervous system all at once. "You cannot do this," Calvin wheezed, his eyes bulging as he stared at the green confirmation screen. "I am your father. I gave you life. I built this empire. I will give you half. I will give you 70% of the company. Zuri, please, do not push that button. Do not send it." "It is already sent," I replied, my expression entirely unbiding. "The DOJ algorithm is completely automated once the Director of Cyber Command triggers a red flag asset freeze, which means your personal and corporate bank accounts have just been permanently locked pending federal indictment." Calvin shook his head violently, refusing to accept reality. No, that is impossible. You cannot just freeze my money. I have lawyers, I have politicians on my payroll. I own this town." I tilted my head, gesturing toward the sleek smartphone sitting on the edge of his desk. "Check your phone, Calvin." He lunged for the device with trembling, uncoordinated fingers. He swiped across the screen, his breathing growing louder and more frantic with every passing second. The screen illuminated with dozens of automated banking alerts. Urgent messages from his offshore wealth managers, frantic notifications from his domestic accountants, and critical warnings from his corporate holding firms. Every single account was showing a balance of 0. The digital locks had slammed shut across the globe simultaneously. "No," Calvin moaned, dropping the phone onto the desk as if it had physically burned him. He clutched his chest again, sinking heavily into the leather chair, his arrogant posture completely collapsing. "You ruined me. You ruined your own family. You ruined yourself the moment you thought the United States military was your personal piggy bank," I corrected him, my voice colder than ice. Outside the heavy mahogany doors, the faint, muffled sound of the jazz band continued to play. The wealthy guests were still laughing, drinking the expensive bourbon, and eating the gourmet barbecue. They were completely oblivious to the fact that the man hosting them was now functionally bankrupt and mere hours away from wearing federal handcuffs. You think you are so smart? Calvin spat a sudden desperate surge of venomous anger, temporarily overriding his panic. His face twisted into a mask of pure hatred. You think wearing that uniform makes you better than me? They will fire you for this. When my lawyers get through with you, they will say you targeted me out of a personal vendetta. They will strip you of your rank. You are nothing but an ungrateful, spiteful little brat. I calmly closed the heavy lid of the SCIF laptop, the sharp click of the latch echoing in the tense room. My rank is secured by the Joint Chiefs of Staff, I said, picking up the heavy machine and sliding it back into my briefcase. And my operation today was fully authorized by General Thomas Wright himself, the man you so brilliantly tried to bribe in public. There will be no lawyers to save you, Calvin. You do not have any money left to pay them. The funds currently being used to cater your little party outside are frozen. The catering company will bounce your check by tomorrow afternoon. Calvin's mouth hung open. He looked from the closed laptop to my face, the last flickering ember of his defiance finally extinguishing. He looked small. He looked old. He looked exactly like the pathetic hollow fraud he had always been beneath the expensive suits and the boastful rhetoric. He opened his mouth to speak, to beg, to hurl another insult, but his vocal cords simply failed him. He clutched his chest, staring at the floor, his entire body trembling violently. I picked up my briefcase, adjusting the strap on my shoulder. I looked around the opulent, smoke-filled study one last time, feeling absolutely nothing for the man trembling in the chair. "Enjoy the cookout, Dad," I said smoothly, turning toward the heavy double doors. "I suggest you eat as much of that premium Wagyu beef as you can stomach right now. The food in federal lockup is notoriously substandard." I unbolted the door and stepped out of the study, leaving Calvin Harrison entirely alone to suffocate in the ashes of his own burned empire. The bright, cheerful noise of the Juneteenth party washed over me as I walked down the hallway, the sound of a world that no longer belonged to him. I had barely taken 3 steps down the plushly carpeted corridor when a tremendous, shattering crash erupted from inside the study behind me. Calvin had evidently found his voice and used it to hurl his heavy crystal decanter directly against the solid mahogany door frame. The violent noise ripped through the quiet hallway, a sharp, destructive sound that instantly shattered the illusion of peaceful suburban wealth. Before I could put more distance between myself and the wreckage of my father, heavy, frantic footsteps pounded against the polished hardwood floor around the corner. Marcus rounded the bend at a full, reckless sprint, his face twisted into an ugly, unhinged mask of panic and rage. Chloe was right on his heels, her designer sandals clicking frantically against the floorboards, her perfectly styled hair flying wildly out of place. Marcus skidded to a halt, taking one look at my calm, unbothered demeanor, and then looked past me through the open doorway of the study. He saw Calvin collapsed in his leather chair, clutching his chest and staring at his phone as if it were a live grenade. It did not take a genius to connect the dots, and Marcus, despite his entirely fraudulent military credentials, was at least capable of basic survival instinct. He knew exactly what I had just done. He knew the money was gone. He knew the shield protecting his fake career had just been completely obliterated. He snapped. The carefully cultivated facade of the disciplined elite warrior vanished, entirely replaced by the rabid, thrashing desperation of a cornered animal whose trap had just sprung shut. "You miserable, jealous piece of trash!" Marcus roared, the veins in his neck bulging against his collar as he charged directly at me. "You just destroyed everything. You ruined our family. You ruined my entire future." He lunged forward, closing the distance between us in 2 massive strides. His right hand curled into a tight, white-knuckled fist, pulling back as if he fully intended to strike me right across the face. He was completely out of his mind, running on pure toxic adrenaline, and the terrifying realization that his entire life was a lie that had just been exposed to the sunlight. He was fully intent on physically destroying the woman who had permanently dismantled his illegal gravy train. But before he could throw the punch, Chloe grabbed his arm. She did not grab him to stop the violence. She grabbed him to fuel his fire, stepping up beside him, so they formed a united, vicious front. Her face was contorted with a hideous, sneering entitlement. The polished upper-crust socialite routine dissolved completely, revealing the raw, unfiltered bigotry and elitism she had harbored since the day we met. "Do not even bother dirtying your hands on her, Marcus." Chloe hissed, her voice echoing shrilly off the expensive wallpaper. She looked me up and down with absolute undisguised revulsion. "You think wearing that eagle on your collar makes you untouchable?" Chloe sneered, stepping closer, pointing a manicured finger directly at my chest. "You think you can just march in here and audit your betters? You are nothing. You are a diversity quota who got lucky with a keyboard. You are a pencil pusher who manipulated the system to get a rank you absolutely do not deserve." She puffed her chest out, clinging to the only currency she thought she had left. "My husband is a Navy SEAL." Chloe practically screamed, her voice vibrating with hysterical pride. "He is the absolute tip of the spear, the most elite fighting force on the planet. He bleeds for this country while you sit in an air-conditioned room tapping on a computer. His career will completely crush you. He is going to drag you in front of a military tribunal. He is going to have you court-martialed for abuse of power, and my father will personally ensure they strip that uniform right off your back and throw you in Leavenworth." It was a spectacular, breathtaking display of delusion. She was standing in a house funded by bribery, defending a husband who had purchased his valor, threatening the director of Cyber Command with a court-martial that her own father had already distanced himself from. They were drowning, and they were trying to use a lead weight as a life preserver. Marcus seemed empowered by his wife's vitriolic rant. He shook off her hand and stepped back into my personal space, towering over me, his chest heaving. His fist remained tightly clenched at his side, trembling with the effort to hold it back. "Fix it!" Marcus ordered, his voice dropping to a lethal, desperate growl. "Go back into that study log, back into your little system, and reverse whatever you just did. Undo the freeze. Clear my father's name. Clear my record. Do it right now, Zuri, or I swear to God I will make you regret the day you were born." I did not take a single step backward. I did not flinch. I did not break eye contact. I stood perfectly still, my posture radiating the absolute glacial calm of an officer who had stared down international cyber terrorists without blinking. I looked at his clenched fist, and then I looked directly into his terrified, bloodshot eyes. "Strike a superior commissioned officer, Ensign," I said, my voice dropping to a razor-thin, razor-sharp whisper that cut right through his bluster. "Do it. Throw the punch. Give me the excuse to add physically assaulting a federal official to your federal indictment." Marcus froze. The absolute certainty in my voice hit him like a bucket of ice water. He saw the cold, clinical calculation in my eyes. He realized in that fraction of a second that I was not afraid of him. I had never been afraid of him. I was simply waiting for him to make one more mistake so I could bury him even deeper. His fist trembled, hovering uselessly in the air between us. The fake SEAL, the man who had bought his physical evaluations, did not have the actual courage to strike a woman who was looking him dead in the eye. He slowly, agonizingly lowered his hand, his breathing ragged and uneven. Chloe scoffed, stepping forward again, determined to have the last word. "You are bluffing. You have no authority here. We are untouchable. You are just a bitter, jealous washout who wants to ruin us because you could never be us." I did not bother addressing her pathetic rant. I simply broke eye contact, slowly raising my left wrist to check the face of my watch. The second hand ticked precisely past the 12. "Right on time," I murmured softly. Chloe frowned, her brow furrowing in confusion. "What are you talking about?" Before she could finish the sentence, the heavy, aggressive sound of screeching tires violently disrupted the peace of the suburban estate. The noise was loud, multiple heavy vehicles slamming their brakes in unison just outside the front gates of the mansion. Marcus whipped his head toward the front of the house, his eyes widening in sheer panic. The heavy oak front door of the mansion rattled as someone outside began pounding on it with enough force to splinter the wood. A loud, mechanically amplified voice suddenly boomed through a bullhorn, echoing across the manicured lawns and cutting straight through the jazz music playing on the patio. "Federal Bureau of Investigation. Open the door immediately. We have a federal warrant for the arrest of Calvin Harrison and Marcus Harrison. Open the door or we will breach the premises." The color instantly drained from Chloe's face, leaving her looking like a porcelain doll. She stumbled backward, her hands flying up to cover her mouth as the reality of my words finally crashed down upon her. The flashing red and blue lights of dozens of federal vehicles began reflecting through the tall decorative windows of the hallway, casting an eerie, chaotic glow over her terrified features. Marcus let out a strangled, pathetic whimper. He looked at me, his eyes begging for a mercy he had never once shown me. He was no longer the golden boy. He was just a terrified criminal waiting for the hammer to fall. I adjusted the strap of my briefcase on my shoulder, stepped smoothly around his trembling, frozen form, and began walking toward the front door to welcome our guests. I grasped the heavy brass handles of the double oak doors and pulled them open. The tranquil, stagnant air of the mansion's foyer was instantly violated by the harsh, flashing strobe of red and blue lights reflecting off the crystal chandelier above. A dozen heavily armed federal agents in tactical gear swarmed up the stone steps, their boots slamming against the marble with synchronized, terrifying precision. Right behind them, moving with a distinctly different, rigid military discipline, were 4 military police officers. Their crisp uniforms and stern, unyielding expressions stood in stark contrast to the frantic, panicked shouting erupting from the backyard patio as the FBI completely locked down the perimeter. The live jazz band ceased playing, abruptly replaced by the shrill, terrified screams of local politicians and wealthy socialites realizing they were suddenly trapped in a federal raid. Captain Miller, the lead MP, stepped through the doorway and locked eyes with me. He offered a sharp, respectful nod. "Director," he said, his voice cutting through the chaotic din of agents securing the premises. "The perimeter is contained. The primary target is being processed by the Bureau. We are here for the secondary asset." "Right this way, Captain," I replied smoothly. I turned and walked back down the lavish corridor, flanked by the formidable presence of the military police. The heavy thud of their boots on the hardwood floors echoed like a countdown. We rounded the corner toward the study, where the Harrison family's manufactured reality was currently disintegrating into ash. Calvin was already being hauled out of his leather chair by 2 FBI agents, his hands forcefully wrenched behind his back and secured with heavy zip ties. He was weeping openly, his face red and bloated, spouting incomprehensible, pathetic pleas about his political connections and offshore accounts. Nobody was listening. Marcus and Chloe were frozen in the hallway, pressed flat against the expensive silk wallpaper. Marcus had lost all trace of the aggressive, violent bravado he had displayed just moments ago. He looked like a terrified child, his chest heaving, his eyes darting wildly around the corridor looking for an escape route that did not exist. Chloe, however, was still desperately clinging to her delusions of grandeur. As the military police marched toward them, her patrician features twisted into a mask of indignant fury. She stepped in front of Marcus, holding her hand out as if she could halt a federal arrest with sheer social standing. "Do you have any idea who you are dealing with?" Chloe shrieked, her voice echoing shrilly down the hall. "Get your hands off my father-in-law, and do not even think about stepping any closer to my husband. He is a United States Navy SEAL. He is a decorated hero. You have absolutely no jurisdiction over him, and when his commanding officer hears about this, you will all be court-martialed." Captain Miller did not even blink. He simply looked at me, awaiting his orders. I stopped a few feet away from Chloe, letting the absolute crushing silence of the hallway settle around us. I unlatched my briefcase and slowly reached inside. I did not pull out the heavily encrypted laptop this time. Instead, I withdrew a simple physical manila folder. It was thick-bound with a red cord and prominently stamped with the official insignia of the Naval Special Warfare Command. I held the file in my hands, looking directly into Chloe's frantic, bloodshot eyes. "You are so immensely proud of that label, aren't you?" "Chloe," I said, my voice perfectly level, carrying the clinical detachment of a surgeon about to make a fatal incision. "The elite SEAL wife. The untouchable military royalty. You wear his trident like a crown to justify looking down on everyone else in the world." I shifted my gaze past her, locking onto Marcus. He was trembling so violently that his expensive linen shirt was vibrating. Sweat poured down his face, stinging his eyes, but he could not look away from the manila folder in my hands. "Marcus," I continued, my voice dropping an octave, echoing off the high ceiling. "Did you actually think Naval Special Warfare Command did not know? Did you really honestly believe you could hide your incompetence forever?" Marcus swallowed hard, shaking his head slightly, a pathetic, wordless plea for mercy. I slipped the red cord off the folder and opened it. I pulled out a stack of bank transaction records, military training logs, and a signed, sworn confession. "Did you think the Department of Defense was blind?" I asked, stepping closer. "Did you think we would not notice that you bribed your training officer $50,000 just to pass your pool competency test?" Chloe gasped a sharp, ragged intake of breath that sounded like she was suffocating. She whipped her head around to look at Marcus. Her mouth fell open. "Marcus," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Marcus, what is she talking about? Tell her she is lying." He could not speak. He just stared at the floor, his face devoid of color. "Let me paint the picture for you, Chloe," I said, turning my attention back to her horrified face. "During BUD/S training, your big tough hero of a husband panicked in the water. He failed the most basic underwater knot tying test 3 times. He was thrashing, crying, and begging to quit. He was less than 24 hours away from being officially washed out of the program and sent to the fleet as a regular, unremarkable sailor." I tapped the financial records in my hand. But Calvin could not have that. The Harrison dynasty needed a war hero to sell their military contracts. So Calvin wired $50,000 from a Cayman Islands shell company directly to a dummy account owned by Chief Petty Officer Vance, your husband's primary instructor. Vance falsified the training logs, checked the box that said Marcus passed, and pushed him through the rest of the pipeline. "Your husband did not earn that trident, Chloe. He bought it." "That is a lie," Chloe screamed, her voice cracking as tears of utter humiliation finally spilled over her perfectly contoured cheeks. "It is a lie. He deployed. He served. He sat on a secure base in Bahrain, updating logistics spreadsheets, while actual soldiers bled in the sand." I corrected her, my tone utterly devoid of sympathy. "And the only reason he was even allowed on that base was because Cyber Command was actively monitoring his communications, waiting to build a watertight case against Calvin's corporate fraud ring. Your husband was nothing but a highly monitored piece of bait." I turned to Captain Miller and handed him the manila folder. "Captain, you have the authorization to take him into custody. The charges are conspiracy to commit wire fraud, bribery of a federal official, and stolen valor under the Uniform Code of Military Justice." "Yes," Director Miller replied firmly. He gestured to his men. 2 massive military police officers stepped forward, roughly grabbing Marcus by his arms. Marcus did not fight back. The man who had postured as an elite lethal weapon just minutes prior simply went entirely limp. He sobbed openly, a loud, ugly, guttural sound as the cold steel handcuffs clicked tightly around his wrists. "Zuri, please." Marcus wept, his knees giving out as the MPs dragged him away from the wall. "Please, I will do anything. I will testify against Dad. I will tell them everything they want to know. Just do not let them take me to Leavenworth. Please." I watched him thrash weakly in the grip of the officers, feeling nothing but a profound, overwhelming sense of disgust. "Take him away," I instructed the MPs. Chloe collapsed to the floor. The designer gown she had worn to flaunt her wealth pooled around her on the hardwood as she buried her face in her hands. The entire foundation of her existence, her superiority, her wealth, her elite social standing, had just been violently ripped away, exposing her as a fraud married to a coward. She was sobbing hysterically, but I did not offer her a single word of comfort. I turned my back on the wreckage of the Harrison family, walked out the front doors, and stepped into the bright, blinding sunlight of a perfectly clear afternoon. The heavy oak doors swung shut behind me, severing the air-conditioned chill of the mansion from the oppressive, humid heat of the afternoon. The scene unfolding on the sprawling circular driveway was nothing short of cinematic. The jazz band had long since abandoned their instruments. The caterers had stopped flipping the prime cuts of meat. The entire congregation of Calvin Harrison's elite, hand-picked guests had migrated from the backyard patio to the front lawns, drawn by the wailing sirens and the blinding strobing lights of the federal vehicles blockading the gates. Local politicians, city councilmen, and wealthy defense contractors stood frozen like statues on the pristine grass. Crystal champagne flutes and plates of gourmet barbecue dangled forgotten from their hands. They watched in stunned, breathless silence as the illusion of the Harrison Empire was violently dismantled right before their eyes. 2 military police officers marched out of the house right on my heels, dragging Marcus down the stone steps. He was stumbling, his expensive Italian loafers scraping awkwardly against the concrete. The golden boy, the untouchable Navy SEAL, the pride of the local elite, was weeping openly. Snot and tears mixed on his face, his broad shoulders heaving with ragged, panicked sobs. He looked entirely pathetic, stripped of the unearned arrogance that had defined his entire existence. I stopped at the base of the grand staircase, planting my feet on the hot asphalt. The FBI agents were already moving in organized tactical sweeps, carrying heavy black boxes of confiscated hard drives and physical ledgers out of Calvin's private study. The guests parted like the Red Sea as the agents marched past, desperate to avoid making eye contact, terrified that the federal corruption might somehow splash onto their own tailored suits. I turned to face my brother. The MPs held him upright, his wrists bound tightly behind his back in heavy steel cuffs. He refused to look at me, keeping his tear-streaked face angled toward the ground. "Look at me, Marcus," I commanded, my voice projecting clearly across the silent manicured lawn. I wanted every single politician, every single investor, and every single sycophant who had ever enabled this family's toxicity to hear the absolute truth. Marcus slowly lifted his head, his chest shuddering. "The training officer who took your money was arrested at 0600 hours this morning in San Diego." I stated, my tone clinical, detached, and utterly merciless. I personally directed the anti-corruption task force that raided his quarters. He did not even try to deny it. He surrendered his hidden ledgers immediately in exchange for a plea deal. Your name was printed in bold ink on the very first page of his client list. A collective, horrified gasp rippled through the crowd of onlookers. The local politicians who had posed for photo opportunities with the decorated war hero suddenly looked as though they were going to be physically sick. I turned my gaze to Captain Miller, who stood rigidly at attention beside my trembling brother. I gave the captain a single sharp nod. Miller stepped forward, his jaw locked tight, his eyes burning with the profound, righteous disgust of a man who had actually earned his uniform. He did not say a word. He simply reached out, grabbed the heavy golden special warfare trident pinned proudly to the breast of Marcus's shirt, and violently ripped it away. The sound of the thick threads tearing apart was incredibly loud in the hushed stillness of the driveway. The fabric of Marcus's shirt ripped open, leaving a frayed, jagged hole right over his heart, where his stolen honor had been. Miller held the golden pin in his gloved fist for a moment, looking at it with absolute revulsion, before dropping it into an evidence bag at his belt. "You are not a United States Navy SEAL," I told Marcus, my voice ringing out like a judge delivering a final sentence. "You are a fraud. You are a disgrace to the uniform, a disgrace to the men who actually bled for this country, and a threat to national security." Marcus squeezed his eyes shut, letting out a high, agonizing wail. "The paperwork has already been fully processed by the Pentagon." I continued, showing him absolutely zero mercy. "The order for a dishonorable discharge has been officially signed. You are stripped of your rank. You are stripped of your clearance. You will lose every single veteran benefit you ever claimed to have. You are no longer under the protection of the military justice system. You will be handed over to the Department of Justice to face federal prison time as a civilian." As the finality of those words hung in the air, a frantic scrambling sound echoed from the front porch. Chloe stumbled out of the heavy oak doors, her breathing ragged, her eyes wide and frantic. She gripped the stone railing to steady herself, taking in the apocalyptic scene before her. She saw the federal agents loading Calvin into the back of an armored SUV. She saw the FBI technicians carrying out the physical evidence of their financial ruin. She saw the crowd of elite socialites staring at her family with naked, unadulterated disgust. And finally, she saw her husband stripped of his trident, crying like a child in the grip of the military police. The transition that occurred on Chloe's face was a masterclass in ruthless, self-preserving sociopathy. The devastation and panic vanished instantly, replaced by a cold, calculating, and venomous fury. Her entire sense of superiority, her entire identity, had been built on the foundation of Calvin's endless wealth and Marcus's untouchable military prestige. With the money frozen and the valor proven stolen, Marcus was no longer a golden ticket. He was a sinking anchor, and Chloe had absolutely no intention of drowning with him. She marched down the stone steps, her designer heels clicking sharply against the pavement. She did not look at me. She did not acknowledge the federal agents. She walked directly up to the man she had sworn to love and cherish. Marcus looked up at her, a pathetic, desperate spark of hope flickering in his tear-filled eyes. "Chloe," he croaked, his voice cracking. Chloe, please call your father. Tell him I need a lawyer. Tell him I need help. Chloe stared at him with an expression of pure, unadulterated revulsion. It was the exact same look she had given me in the parking lot hours ago, but now it was directed entirely at her own husband. You pathetic, useless fraud! Chloe hissed, her voice shaking with rage. You lied to me. You told me you were a hero. You told me we were going to run this city. You are nothing but a coward. She reached down and aggressively grabbed her own left hand. With a sharp, violent tug, she ripped the massive, flawless 3-carat diamond engagement ring off her finger. She did not hesitate for a fraction of a second. She pulled her arm back and hurled the heavy piece of jewelry directly at Marcus's face. The heavy platinum band struck him hard against the cheekbone, leaving a bright red welt, before clattering loudly onto the asphalt by his feet. Do not ever speak to me again, Chloe snarled, stepping back as if his very proximity might infect her with his failure. Do not call me. Do not look for me. My father will have the divorce papers drawn up and filed before you even reach the holding cell. You make me sick. Without another word, Chloe turned on her heel. She did not look back. She practically sprinted down the long, winding driveway, violently pushing her way through the crowd of stunned party guests. She shoved past city councilmen and wealthy contractors, desperate to distance herself from the radioactive fallout of the Harrison family. She was abandoning the sinking ship, saving her own skin, with the ruthless efficiency of a parasite seeking a new host. I watched her disappear down the street, feeling a profound sense of closure. The entire toxic ecosystem that had sustained this family was collapsing in on itself. Take him, I said, nodding to Captain Miller. The MPs hauled Marcus forward, marching him toward the waiting transport vehicles. He did not look back at the mansion. He did not look at the ring laying in the dirt. He just kept his head down, finally forced to carry the weight of his own actions. I stood in the driveway, the warm afternoon sun beating down on my shoulders, breathing in the fresh air. The heavy, suffocating shadow of the Harrison family had finally been lifted, permanently eradicated by the very light they had tried so desperately to hide from. The silence on the lawn was absolute, broken only by the crunch of gravel as the city's elite scrambled toward the valet station. The very politicians and investors who had spent the afternoon toasting my father's brilliance were now practically tripping over their own tailored hemlines to escape the blast radius of his downfall. It was a mass exodus of cowards. They averted their eyes as they rushed past me, terrified that even looking at a federal officer might implicate them in Calvin's treason. I watched them flee with mild amusement. This was the loyalty money bought. It evaporated the second the checks stopped clearing. The heavy thud of the oak doors crashing open against the exterior brickwork drew my attention back to the house. My mother stumbled out onto the grand portico. Denise was entirely unrecognizable. The immaculate, composed matriarch of the Harrison Empire had been utterly destroyed. Her custom designer sundress was wrinkled and stained with spilled wine. Her perfectly coiffed hair hung in jagged, messy strands around her face. Mascara ran in thick, dark rivers down her cheeks, tracking through the heavy layers of foundation she used to project perfection to the world. She looked wildly around the empty patio, taking in the abandoned champagne flutes, the overturned chairs, and the flashing emergency lights reflecting off the infinity pool. She saw the taillights of the military police transport carrying Marcus away. She saw the FBI agents cataloging the last of the evidence boxes. Then her frantic, bloodshot eyes locked onto me. She let out a guttural, desperate sound that was half sob, half scream. She practically threw herself down the stone steps, her expensive wedges snapping under her weight. She kicked the broken shoes away and ran across the hot asphalt barefoot. She collapsed at my feet. It was a literal collapse. Her knees hit the hard driveway and she threw her arms forward, wrapping her hands tightly around my ankles. I looked down at her, feeling a strange, profound emptiness. There was no anger left. There was no sadness. There was just the clinical observation of a broken machine. "Zuri, please!" Denise wailed, her voice cracking and raw. She pressed her tear-soaked face against my shin. "Please, you have to stop this. You have to tell them it is a mistake. Call your superiors. Make a phone call. You have the power to fix this. Calvin is your father. He loves you. He just made a miscalculation. He is a good man." I did not move. I let her weep. I let her humiliate herself in front of the remaining federal agents who were watching the display with silent disgust. "And Marcus," she gasped, her fingernails digging desperately into my skin. "Your brother is just a boy. He did not know what he was doing. Chloe manipulated him. The military pressured him. You cannot let them take him to prison, Zuri. He will not survive in there. You know how sensitive he is. Please, I am begging you. We are your family. Blood is thicker than water. Family is everything. You cannot do this to your own flesh and blood." She looked up at me, her face a horrific mask of desperation. She was searching my eyes for the eager, obedient little girl she had spent 3 decades ignoring. She was looking for the daughter who used to sit in the overflow bleachers hoping her mother would glance her way. That girl had died a long time ago, forged into something far harder and much less forgiving by the very neglect Denise had subjected her to. "Family is everything," I repeated softly, letting the words roll over my tongue. I looked at her hands, gripping my ankles, feeling a mild revulsion at the contact. I took a deliberate, measured step backward. The movement was sharp enough to force her hands to lose their grip. Denise slumped forward onto the asphalt, her palms scraping against the rough surface. She looked up at me, shocked by the cold physical rejection. "You do not get to use that word," I told her, my voice ringing with absolute unyielding authority. "You do not get to invoke the concept of family when you spent your entire life treating me like a disease you could not wait to cure. You stood in the VIP lounge this morning and looked at me as if I were garbage. You let your husband steal from the country I swore to protect. You let your son parade around in a stolen uniform. You built a monument to greed and called it a home." Denise sobbed, reaching out a trembling hand, but she did not dare touch me again. "We did the best we could," she cried. "We gave you a good life. You gave me a masterclass in fraud," I corrected her coldly. "You once told me I was the stain on this family when I left basic training. You told me I was a failure because I did not fit into your pristine, perfectly manufactured social circle." I looked down at her ruined face, stripping away the very last illusion she had left to cling to. "But you were wrong, Mother," I stated, emphasizing the title with a heavy dose of irony. "I am not the stain on this family. This family is the stain on the military uniform, and today, I finally washed it out." Denise let out a shattered, breathless wail. She curled into a tight ball on the hot driveway, pressing her face against her knees, completely broken by the absolute finality of my words. There were no more lies to tell. There were no more manipulations left to deploy. She was utterly alone in the wreckage of her own making. I turned my back on her for the final time. At the end of the long driveway, just past the massive iron gates that had kept the real world out for so long, a heavy matte black armored SUV pulled up. It was a customized Chevrolet Suburban, equipped with ballistic glass and reinforced steel plating bearing the subtle, discreet government plates of my security detail. As I walked toward the gates, the rear door of the SUV swung open. A federal protection agent in a crisp, dark suit stepped out. He moved with swift, silent efficiency, opening a large, sleek black umbrella to shield me from the blinding glare of the afternoon sun. He held the door open, his posture projecting absolute respect and unyielding discipline. "Director," the agent said, nodding respectfully as I approached. "Your transport is ready. We have a clear route back to the airfield." "Thank you, Agent," I replied. I stepped into the cool, climate-controlled interior of the armored vehicle. The leather seats were immaculate, the air completely free of the stifling, oppressive humidity that had choked the Harrison estate. I settled into the back seat, leaning my head against the headrest. The agent closed the heavy vault, like door sealing me safely inside my own world. I reached into the cup holder beside me and retrieved a chilled bottle of spring water. I twisted the cap off and took a long, slow sip. The water was crisp and incredibly refreshing, washing away the lingering bitter taste of Calvin's expensive bourbon and the toxic atmosphere of the house I had finally left behind. Through the thick, tinted ballistic glass, I looked out at the estate one last time. I could see Denise still curled on the asphalt, a small, pathetic figure dwarfed by the massive, empty mansion. The FBI agents were sealing the front doors with bright yellow evidence tape, officially declaring the Harrison dynasty a federal crime scene. In the distance, carrying clearly on the warm summer breeze, the shrill rising wail of police sirens began to echo down the street. It was a chorus of local law enforcement reinforcements rushing toward the estate to secure the perimeter and assist with the asset seizure. The sound grew louder, a relentless approaching storm of justice that Calvin and Marcus could no longer outrun. I took another sip of water, feeling the cool liquid slide down my throat. A genuine, serene smile spread across my face. It was the smile of a woman who had fought her way out of the shadows and claimed her rightful place in the sun. The agent slid into the driver's seat and put the heavy vehicle into gear. As the armored SUV pulled smoothly away from the curb, leaving the sirens and the ruins of my past behind, the world outside the tinted windows began to slowly fade to black.